Under the glimmering night sky of a bustling metropolis, the streets thrummed with energy as revelers embraced the vibrant nightlife. Amid the lively atmosphere, the scene shifted to a spirited restaurant where a man was voraciously devouring his meal without restraint. Bystanders began to whisper uneasily, debating whether to intervene. Some speculated he might collapse from overeating, bewildered by the tears streaming down his face as he consumed the feast. His massive size and insatiable appetite drew comparisons to a lavish holiday banquet, leaving the crowd both astonished and perplexed. Within the gathering, one man quietly remarked that this might be some people's first encounter with the individual, though he was quite prominent in Henan. Another man chuckled, wondering if it was due to the man's striking appearance. The first man advised against making superficial judgments, noting that the others still had much to learn. He elaborated that even if the newcomer wasn't a local, he must have heard of this remarkable figure famed for achieving the impossible, unifying all the merchant unions in Henan. Surprised, the second man listened as the first revealed the man's identity, Warren of the Sky Ocean Merchant Union, the grand merchant credited with the unprecedented accomplishment. Nearby, a woman's voice pierced through the murmurs, urging Warren to stop. She pointed out that while most people consumed 3 meals daily, he was devouring 3 days' worth in one sitting. Frustrated, she attempted to pull him from his seat, but her efforts were in vain, as he was as immovable as a mountain. Some onlookers marveled at the notion that he was once regarded as handsome in his youth. The woman, whose name was Manhwa, warned him that his gluttony would ruin him. Tears continued to stream down Warren's face as he confessed, his voice laden with sorrow, that if he stopped eating, the memories of a harrowing day would return to torment him. Her expression softened with a mix of pain and empathy as she released him and gently asked whether he truly intended to live the rest of his life in this manner. Later that night, during a solitary carriage ride home, Warren removed his ornate jewelry, his reflection somber. He admitted aloud that all his wealth and riches felt meaningless, incapable of mending the wound within him. His excessive indulgence in luxury and gluttony served merely as a mask for the anguish of losing loved ones, a pain only human connection could heal. Yet, the haunting memories of that fateful day continued to plague him. Beside him, Yanhwa's concern was evident. Warren sighed, pondering the years that had passed since he made the Sky Ocean Merchant Union his home. Yet, Yanhwa still addressed him as young master instead of head merchant. Her gaze was warm as she responded that no matter how much time passed, he would always be the young master of the Tianzhong clan. In her eyes. Observing her closely, Warren noticed the faint wrinkles beginning to form on her face. A wave of realization swept over him as he remembered how, even after he had left the clan and married into another family, Manhwa had remained unwaveringly by his side. Manhwa was more than a mere servant to Warren, she was like family, someone without whom he believed he wouldn't have survived. As he touched the scar etched on his forehead, Warren confessed that everything had unraveled the day the Tianzhong clan was destroyed. A vivid image of his family flashed through his mind, and he admitted that he had once harbored bitter resentment toward them, particularly his father, whom he had loathed more than anyone else. Years prior, consumed by bitterness, Warren had commissioned a statue of himself and instructed a young Manhwa to guide his father to it if he ever came looking for him. Despite being the eldest son of a flourishing martial arts clan, Warren had completely severed ties with his family. His resentment was so profound that he didn't object when he was essentially bartered into an arranged marriage with the Sky Ocean Merchant Union. Years later, tragedy struck when the Tianzhong clan was besieged by a sect. As flames devoured his ancestral home, Warren came to a devastating realization: despite his earlier hatred, he deeply loved his father. Grief-stricken and filled with remorse, he seized the statue and began repeatedly headbutting it, wailing in anguish. Manhwa rushed to his side, desperately pleading for him to stop before he hurt himself further. Eventually, Warren collapsed to his knees, and Manhwa comforted him as they both remained, watching their clan burn into ash through the long night. In the present, as the carriage rattled down the path, a foreboding presence loomed closer. Inside, Warren spoke to Manhwa, declaring his decision to turn over a new leaf. He promised to repair his relationship with his wife and abandon the reckless lifestyle he had been leading. Acknowledging that he had mourned long enough, he vowed to care for the family he still had, though he worried about how distant his wife might be toward him. Chuckling softly, he told Manhwa that she was like family to him. Smiling warmly, Manhwa promised to continue serving him faithfully. Suddenly, a projectile tore through the carriage wall, and a man burst in, colliding with Manhwa and hurling her through the air before crashing out the opposite side. The carriage flipped violently, and Warren, bleeding from a head wound, spotted Manhwa sprawled some distance away. Meanwhile, the attacker, a frail but fierce old man, regained his balance only to slam into a tree due to his momentum. Coughing up blood, he muttered that his organs were shredded. A group of masked figures swiftly encircled him. Despite his grievous wounds, the old man caught an assailant's blade by letting it pierce through his hand. The masked figures sneered, mocking him and taunting that they had warned there was no escape. The old man spat blood and accused them of treachery, revealing himself as the demonic master. Seizing the opportunity, the assailants drove a blade into his abdomen, ridiculing him for his pitiful downfall and blaming his demise on the blood demon castle. Gritting his teeth in defiance, the demonic master unleashed a crimson aura, scattering or annihilating several attackers. Near the overturned carriage, Warren lay on the ground, drenched in blood. His blurred vision caught sight of something shifting in the distance. Manhwa lay motionless nearby, and Warren, overwhelmed by grief, bellowed into the night, his anguish reverberating through the air. In the distance, the demonic master staggered forward, leaving a crimson trail in his wake. Falling to his knees, he muttered that he needed a new body before his heart gave out. As he prepared to execute the spirit possession technique, blood gushed from his mouth, and he grimly admitted that this might mark the end of his journey. Suddenly, Warren stormed toward him, fury blazing in his eyes. He accused the old man of causing the loss of his family member by dragging them into his fight and demanded an explanation for why the battle had to take place there. The demonic master remained silent, prompting Warren to seize him by the collar, shouting for acknowledgement of the life lost. The old man mumbled something inaudible, and Warren shook him violently. Before Warren could act further, the demonic master swiftly channeled his aura into his fingertips, striking several pressure points on Warren's body. Warren froze, his body stiffening before collapsing to the ground. Confused, he struggled to move, but his body refused to respond. Gritting his teeth, he tried to lift his hand, but the demonic master scolded him for treating a wounded elder so roughly. Still paralyzed, Warren muttered that he knew the old man was a martial artist but never imagined this was how his story would end. Sitting beside him, the demonic master confessed that this was his last chance to perform the spirit possession technique. Though he had hoped to claim a young and skilled body, time had run out, leaving him no choice but to settle for what he could get. "Even if it's the body of a pig," he sneered, "I'll make it work." He began the ritual, channeling 160 years of martial essence and true ki into his left hand, placing it on Warren's abdomen. Simultaneously, he directed his soul and spirit into his right hand, pressing it against Warren's forehead. The energies had to synchronize perfectly for the technique to succeed. After a tense moment, the surrounding aura dissipated, and the old man's body went limp. Warren abruptly sat up, shoving the corpse aside. He clenched his fist experimentally, a sinister grin spreading across his face. The possession had worked. Before he could revel in triumph, an excruciating headache racked his body. The demonic master's voice echoed in his mind, declaring that Warren should already be subdued by his true ki and spiritual force. The scene shifted to reveal the demonic master's soul floating behind Warren's body, growing frustrated as Warren refused to yield. "I will survive," Warren roared defiantly. "I must avenge my clan." The demonic master scoffed, dismissing his resolve as futile. With a malevolent grin, he began absorbing Warren's soul, drawing in its essence. Warren's consciousness wavered, deteriorating as the demonic master gained dominance. Suddenly, one of the masked attackers appeared behind Warren's body, instantly recognizing that the demonic master had completed the transfer. Though many demonic practitioners revered him, his reputation faltered as the assassin lunged with a blade. The demonic master muttered, "This is bad," realizing his possession technique was still incomplete. The sword pierced through his throat, causing him to cough up blood as a crimson aura flared around him, followed by a violent explosion. Meanwhile, Warren's voice echoed, complaining that his head felt as though it would split open. The scene shifted, and Warren awoke in an unfamiliar apothecary. Sitting up groggily, he wondered where he was, his throat parched. Spotting a bowl of medicine nearby, he took a sip, grimacing at the bitter taste. "This is awful," he exclaimed. As he lifted his hand, horror gripped him, his once sturdy hands were now thin and frail. He dropped the bowl in shock, shattering it on the floor. Panicking, he stared at his hands, muttering, "What the hell happened to me?" A young girl rushed into the room, alarmed by the noise. Calling his name, she asked if he was all right and mentioned hearing something break. To his astonishment, it was Manhwa, appearing much younger. Grabbing her frantically, he demanded to know how she had regained her youth. Confused, she asked if he'd had a nightmare. Warren tried to convince himself that this must be a dream, but a sudden sharp pain in his foot jolted him back to reality. Looking down, he saw he had stepped on a shard of glass. The sensation was far too vivid to be a mere dream. His expression twisted in bewilderment as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. An idea struck him, and without a word, he stood up and limped outside, ignoring Yanhwa's protests about his injury. Stopping before a familiar statue, he stared at it in disbelief. "This can't be. Why is this here?" he muttered, his voice trembling. He vividly recalled destroying it on that fateful day and couldn't fathom its presence now. His hands quivered as he reached out to touch it. Overcome with emotion, he called out to Manhwa, who saw him trembling and weeping. Concerned, she asked when he had the statue erected. She explained it had only been there for 5 days. Hearing this, Warren's expression hardened with determination. "There's still time," he declared resolutely. Manhwa watched in confusion as Warren gripped the statue tightly and, with an anguished cry, slammed his head into it. The statue cracked on impact. With one final, forceful blow, it shattered completely, reduced to rubble by Warren's sheer strength and resolve. He stood there, blood dripping from his forehead, breathing heavily as the weight of his emotions consumed him. Yanhwa's panicked scream echoes as she calls out to Warren, desperate to know if he's alright. Yet he remains silent, standing amid the shattered fragments of the statue. The realization hits him, this is no illusion. Somehow, he has returned to the past. His gaze locks onto the broken pieces scattered across the ground as his mind races. Comprehension dawns, he is 3 years before the fall of his clan. For Warren, this time is more than sufficient. The narrative then shifts, delving into the history of the Tianzhong clan, a martial arts family residing near Tianzhong Mountain in Henan. Decades ago, several households adopted the mountain's name, but it was the Yong family who united them, establishing the esteemed Tianzhong clan. At its zenith, the clan commanded widespread admiration and was synonymous with martial prowess. However, as time passed, its fame waned, reducing it to a mere echo of its former glory. The scene transitions to Warren's father, Yong, who sighs heavily as he sets down his teacup. He laments that 3 decades have passed without the rise of a new martial arts expert since elder Yong Gosang, the supreme dragon of Henan. Across from him, his wife listens attentively as he shares his sorrow over the clan's decline. He admits it's disheartening to witness their family's legacy diminish to mere whispers of bygone strength. She offers reassurance, expressing hope that Warren will recover and lead them to brighter days. However, Yong shakes his head, revealing that both of them know how much Warren resents him. Yong confesses that despite his efforts to be considerate, perhaps he had remarried too quickly after his first wife's passing, making his son feel abandoned. His wife smiles softly, urging him to be patient, believing Warren simply needs more time. Yet Yong feels the rift between them widening rather than healing. He recalls visiting Warren 5 days ago, only to find a statue in the garden. Warren had coldly told him to treat the statue as though it were him instead. Sighing, Yong apologizes for venting too much. At that moment, Manhwa bursts into the courtyard, visibly distressed. Alarmed, Yong asks what's wrong and why she's so upset. Gasping for breath, Manhwa struggles to speak but breaks down in tears. Yong gently encourages her to calm down and explain. Between sobs, she finally reveals that Warren has injured himself and is now unconscious. Both Yong and his wife are shocked by the revelation. The scene transitions to Warren lying in bed, drenched in sweat as if tormented by a nightmare. In his dream, he stands beneath a waterfall, watching koi fish swim around. His mother sits beside him, smiling warmly. Young Warren laughs joyfully, announcing that he's caught a big one and urging her to look. But when he turns, he finds her slumped lifelessly on the rocks. Dropping the fish, he rushes to her in panic. The memory shifts to her lying pale and frail in bed as Warren weeps by her side. She beckons him closer, apologizing for being unable to take him to the waterfall again. Sobbing, he clings to her while she gently consoles him, urging him to stop crying. Suddenly, the dream twists into a nightmare. The demonic master appears, seizing Warren by the head and taunting him for his weakness. Mocking him for his tears, the master declares he will claim Warren's head as a trophy. The vision turns grotesque, and Warren lets out a blood-curdling scream as he jolts awake, his heart racing wildly. Warren awakens in his bed, immediately struck by a strange blend of familiarity and unfamiliarity. The room is unmistakably his childhood bedroom, yet it feels alien after so many years. As the realization settles in, he grapples with the truth he has indeed returned to the past. The weight of his memories presses down on him, and he reflects on the resentment he once harbored toward his father, which led to his isolation from the family. His thoughts turn grim as he recalls the chain of tragic events that began with his father's brutal murder and culminated in the complete collapse of the Tianzhong clan. Regret gnaws at him as he wonders if his knowledge of the future can help him avert the disaster and protect his people this time. Suddenly, a strange sensation interrupts his thoughts, a surge of unfamiliar energy within his abdomen. Heat builds rapidly, leaving him both bewildered and alarmed. Outside his room, two women gossip about him. One scoffs at the idea that Warren destroyed the statue by headbutting it, citing his frail constitution and lack of martial arts training. The other insists she witnessed the event herself and speculates that he might be possessed. Their conversation halts abruptly when the door slams open, and Warren steps out, trembling. The women stammer excuses for their gossip, but Warren ignores them, focused solely on the searing heat radiating from his lower dantian. Panic grips him as he realizes the old man's energy has awakened, flooding his body with an overwhelming surge of Yang energy. Fearing he might lose control, he dashes into the forest, muttering about the need to manage the chaotic force. His body feels on the brink of explosion as he races through the woods. Finally, he leaps into the icy waters of a familiar waterfall, the same one from his dream. The freezing water engulfs him, cooling his overheated body as steam rises from his skin. Letting out a long sigh of relief, he feels temporarily saved just as he regains his composure. A voice calls his name. Startled, Warren looks up to see his father, Yong, rushing toward him. To his astonishment, Yong leaps into the frigid water and grabs him, tears streaming down his face. Accusing him of trying to end his life on such a cold day, Yong's voice is filled with anguish and desperation. Overcome with emotion, Warren struggles to hold back but ultimately embraces his father tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. Gratitude swells in his chest for this second chance. Whether this is a dream or reality, he silently vows never to lose his family again. 3 months pass, and Warren's relationship with his family begins to mend. One afternoon, he goes fishing with his younger half-brother, Kajong, a boy he barely interacted with in his previous life. Kajong grins triumphantly, showing off his fuller basket of fish and teasing that he's winning their bet. Warren reflects on how he had neglected Kajong before, even as the boy struggled with a chi blockage caused by the clan's martial arts training. In his past life, Kajung's condition left him bedridden, which contributed to the clan's decline. At the time, Warren had been too preoccupied with his duties as a son-in-law of the Sky Ocean Merchant Union to intervene. Now, guilt gnaws at him for his indifference. During their trip, Kajong hesitantly asks if it's really okay to stop taking the prescribed medicines. Warren laughs, joking that the medicines would only make him fat. When Kajong protests that he doesn't recall ever being fat, Warren quickly corrects himself, saying they might lead to it eventually. Kajong chuckles, remarking that he likes the new Warren, especially since he's been receiving allowances disguised as bets. When Kajong flaunts his superior catch, Warren dramatically hurls his fish into the air, declaring he won't lose again. The brothers burst into laughter as Warren playfully grabs Kajong, declaring he's caught the biggest fish yet before pulling him into the water. As they splash around, Warren silently apologizes to Kajong, vowing to shield him from the burdens that once crushed him. Meanwhile, Warren has been diligently preparing for martial arts training, focusing on strengthening his body. He meditates daily beneath the waterfall to stabilize the old man's energy, which has remained dormant since its initial surge. One morning, as he finishes his meditation, he notices his younger half-sister, Sialan, standing nearby with a towel in hand. She cheerfully hands it to him, remarking that it feels like they're finally growing closer. Guilt grips Warren as he recalls how cruelly he treated Sialan in his previous life despite her kind nature. She had always tried to connect with him, often inviting him to events like fireworks festivals. Each time, he had harshly rebuffed her, claiming he had no time for trivialities and leaving her in tears. The last time she extended an invitation was their final interaction. On her way to the festival, she was murdered, and a grief-stricken Byung launched a personal investigation. Not long after, Byung was also assassinated. Warren's heart aches as he looks at Sialan, silently vowing never to treat her coldly again. This time, he will protect her, Kajong, and everyone else he lost. As Warren donned his robe, memories flooded back of Sialan's previous invitations to 2 festivals, the Moon Festival taking place today and the Yong Clan Festival set for a year later. Tragically, it was during that future gathering that Sialan met her untimely demise. Resolute in his mission to rewrite fate, Warren asked if today was indeed the Moon Festival. Sialan's eyes sparkled with excitement as she confirmed, her voice tinged with disbelief when he expressed his desire to join her. When he even suggested they shop together beforehand, her joy became palpable. Warren silently vowed not to let this invaluable chance slip by again. Determined to protect his family and restore the Tianzhong clan's former glory, he promised to alter their destiny no matter the cost. Later that day, Warren joined the other disciples for training at the estate, a stark contrast to his former self, who had spent his days confined indoors, consuming bitter tonics and burying himself in books, shunning the outside world. Reflecting on how much his life had shifted, he acknowledged that the ominous energy from the old man's spirit, which once haunted him, now fueled his determination. Though its true nature remained elusive, the force drove him to test his limits and push his body beyond its previous frailty. As Warren practiced, Byung observed him from afar, his eyes filled with pride and emotion. Approaching him, Byung tearfully remarked on how much Warren had changed. Embarrassed by the public display, Warren dismissed it, reminding his father that the other disciples were watching. Laughing heartily, Byung waved off his concern and proposed taking his training to the next level, offering to arrange a formal martial arts instructor. To Byung's surprise, Warren revealed he already had someone in mind. Before they could discuss further, Sialan dashed onto the scene, gleefully throwing her arms around Warren. Twirling to show off her new clothes, she excitedly asked for his opinion, beaming as she declared that her brother had helped her pick out the outfit. Byung sighed but admitted she looked lovely, prompting Sialan to laugh and express her love for him. Watching the heartwarming scene, Warren reflected that physical strength alone wouldn't suffice, he needed the skill and mastery to protect his loved ones. Determined to grow stronger, Warren sought out Byung, the dragon flower sword, known for her unparalleled martial prowess. In the courtyard, he found her practicing with mesmerizing grace, her movements fluid and precise as though dancing with the wind. While her reputation was understated, Warren's knowledge of the future revealed the full extent of her strength. Gathering his courage, he approached her, bowing deeply and earnestly requesting to become her disciple. Byung, surprised by the bold request, remarked on the rumors of his recovery and acknowledged that he seemed different, though she doubted anyone could change so drastically. She rejected his plea, explaining that her focus was on uncovering the stagnation of the Tianzhong clan's secret arts. The refusal stung, but Warren remained undeterred. As she turned to leave, desperation drove him to his knees, shocking Byung. She questioned his behavior, finding it absurd that the eldest son of the Tianzhong clan would kneel over what she deemed a trivial matter. However, Warren's voice, laden with conviction, told a different story. He passionately declared that her contributions to the clan were far from insignificant. Drawing on his knowledge of the future, he recounted her pivotal role in the battle against the D sect, where she earned the title Dragon Bloodflower for her unmatched bravery. Though the title carried a grim connotation, she had sacrificed everything to rebuild the clan, only to meet a mysterious and tragic demise. Warren vowed to prevent her death and the downfall of the clan, his voice trembling with emotion. Intrigued by his words and sincerity, Byung decided to test him, imposing a daunting condition: he had to land a single strike on her during a sparring match. Confident in her abilities, she further handicapped herself, vowing not to use chi or the clan's techniques. Despite Warren's determination, the match proved humiliating. Byung effortlessly disarmed and floored him repeatedly, her skills far beyond his reach. Still, Warren refused to surrender, his resolve burning fiercely. Even as he collapsed, battered and seemingly unconscious, his hand clung stubbornly to his sword. This tenacity earned Byung's respect. As she turned to leave, acknowledging his effort, a faint crimson aura began to radiate from Warren's body. The ominous glow darkened, hinting at the latent power stirring within him and foreshadowing the immense trials he would face on his path to change his family's fate. As Warren stood, a crimson aura swirling around him, Byung instinctively gripped her blade and demanded he return to his senses. However, before she could finish speaking, he closed the distance in an instant. She managed to swing her sword, deflecting his, but sweat beaded on her brow as she noted his unexpected speed. Warren leaped into the air, launching a fierce attack from above. This time, he struck her, sending her crashing into the wall. Realizing she was now cornered, Byung recognized the danger as he prepared to attack again. With no other choice, she drew her sword and unleashed the first form of the soaring dragon emperor's sword to block. To her astonishment, Warren stopped just before landing the blow, leaving her bewildered. Grinning, he triumphantly declared that he had touched her, fulfilling their agreement, and formally called her master before collapsing, unconscious. Glancing back at the wall, Byung was stunned to see a chunk carved out of it, wondering what had just transpired. Sometime later, they trained in the courtyard. Warren swung his sword, the atmosphere around him markedly different. Following up with a diagonal slash, he soared through the air and landed gracefully, replicating the technique Byung had demonstrated earlier. She silently marveled at his rapid progress, reflecting that he had mastered both the soaring dragon emperor's sword and the azure bamboo sword forms in mere days. Perplexed, she remarked that he hadn't displayed any martial aptitude before and asked if he was truly that exhausted. Laughing, he admitted he hadn't fully awakened his potential yet but could wield the two sword styles effortlessly. She remained skeptical, recalling the ominous red aura, and commented on his unbelievable speed in learning martial arts, considering he had been bedridden until recently. Sensing where the conversation was headed, Warren sighed, predicting she was about to ask about the red aura again. He playfully protested, pointing to a bump on his head and joking that only she would treat the Tianzhong clan's eldest son so roughly. Dropping the subject, Byung said that if he didn't want to talk, she wouldn't push further. However, as a member of the clan, she vowed to monitor every aspect of his life. Warren chuckled, remarking that her promise sounded intimidating. That night, in his room, Warren felt something strange. As he practiced the sword techniques he had learned, he came to a startling realization: the Tianzhong clan's martial arts were incomplete. This was inevitable since the clan's techniques originally stemmed from a demonic sect. The founder of the Tianzhong clan had once been a wandering martial artist seeking justice in Henan. He had learned two demonic arts from the hidden saint cult, a sect that was neither fully orthodox nor demonic. Over time, the founder reinvented these arts, forming the two sword techniques used by the clan. Although their power was diminished, it had been sufficient to establish him as Hanan's greatest swordsman. However, their demonic origin meant they were incompatible with orthodox cultivation methods, making it impossible to reach their true peak. The founder had kept this secret, but years later, the truth emerged, precipitating the clan's downfall. Clenching his fists in anger, Warren vowed to change the clan's fate. Armed with his knowledge of the future, he believed he alone could complete the martial art. Later, Warren spoke with his father and stepmother, announcing his intention to visit the clan. Byung asked why he wanted to go, and Warren explained that practicing martial arts had restored his health, making it a good time to visit, especially given his arranged marriage. Byung noted how time had flown, mentioning that the marriage had been arranged before Warren's birth. When his father began mentioning the daughter's name, Warren confidently identified her as Jel Changyang. Smiling, Byung confirmed this, mentioning his friendship with Yugel, Jel's father, and commenting on her renowned beauty. He asked when Warren planned to leave. His stepmother suggested he take more time to recover, given the long journey. Warren laughed, saying that travel was important for meeting people and that his father had met Yugel at his age. Relenting, his stepmother cautioned him to prioritize his health and safety, insisting on a reliable escort for the trip. Just then, Byung appeared, looking furious. Delighted to see her, Warren asked about the two men flanking her. They stepped forward, grasping Byung's arms. The men grinned, commenting on Waren's improved physique and noting how different he looked. Waren immediately identified them as the Rising Ghost Blades and greeted them warmly. The brothers introduced themselves as Jungwook and Wook, promising to protect him. Waren acknowledged their reputation as skilled swordsmen and remarked on his father's thoughtful choice. He firmly stated that he would determine the journey's route and hoped they would follow his lead without question. Jungwook assessed him for a moment before agreeing with a smile. As Waren prepared to leave, he bid farewell to his family. Xiaolin, teary-eyed, asked if he truly had to go. Apologizing, he promised to go wherever she wanted during the central festival. When she asked if he was serious, he reassured her with a smile. Byung and his stepmother watched him with pride. Calling out to Kajung, Waren asked him to protect the family in his absence. Saluting, Kajung promised to guard them with his life, marveling at his brother's newfound presence. Taking a few steps back, Waren declared he was ready to depart. His family respectfully bid him farewell. Just as they began to leave, a familiar voice called out. Turning, Waren saw Yanoa running toward him. The sight triggered a vivid memory of his past when the clan had already fallen, and she had chased after his carriage, begging to join him. The similarity unsettled him, but Jungwook advised him to refuse, stating it was far too dangerous for a servant girl to accompany them. He tells the group to hold on. Dismounting his horse, Waren runs toward Yanoa. Apologizing, he catches her by surprise when, instead of scolding her, he pulls her into a firm embrace. The rest of the party watches the emotional scene unfold. Waren tells Yanoa that her desire to stay by his side means everything to him, and he will forever be grateful. However, the road ahead is perilous and far-reaching. Right now, he admits that he cannot protect her if she accompanies him and refuses to put her in harm's way because she is a cherished part of his family. Smiling gently, he asks her to remain with the household. Yanoa tearfully agrees, and Waren, filled with resolve, leaves the clan behind. He vows to return to the Tianzhong clan with great changes and swears to protect his family while preventing their downfall. As they ride onward, he internally apologizes to his father. The visit to the Jaegal clan is merely a pretense. His true destination is Wudong, where the key to completing their incomplete martial techniques lies. Gazing up at the sky, Waren suddenly finds himself submerged in a vast body of water. Walking aimlessly, he mutters, "This place is endless." A strange sensation ripples through the water behind him. Turning around, he discovers a floating signboard. Picking it up, he realizes it's the Tianzhong clan's emblem. As he looks up, the endless water transforms into a burning ocean of flames. The clan's house stands engulfed in fire, and Waren's eyes widen in shock as he screams, "No!" Running around in desperation, he's suddenly confronted by the demonic master, who sneers at him. Waren collapses to the ground, still screaming. The master mocks him, accusing him of squandering the greatest opportunity granted by the heavens on trivial pursuits. Waren demands to know how the master is here. The old man glares deeply into him, declaring that nothing can be changed and commanding Waren to surrender his body. Just then, a sword cleaves through the master's apparition, jolting Waren back to reality. Bang's voice interrupts his thoughts, asking what has him so distracted. Waren barely reacts before she darts forward, disarming him and pressing her sword against his neck. Sighing, he admits defeat. Byung asks if something is wrong since his focus is lacking. He explains it's not illness, he simply hasn't been sleeping well lately. Jungwook pipes up, suggesting that if he's not feeling great, perhaps a workout will help. They head to a training ground, where Jungwook and Wook enthusiastically demonstrate lifting weights and squatting. The brothers claim these exercises are the ultimate strength builders and help maximize muscle efficiency. Beads of sweat form on Waren's forehead as he nervously backs away, mumbling, "Maybe next time." "Right now, there's something important I need to announce about our journey." As they return to the road, Waren declares that before visiting the Jaegal clan, he wants to make a stop at Mount Seven Sages. Jungwook asks about the detour, and Waren explains that a book by a famed herbalist mentions a secluded part of the mountain where 100-year-old ginseng can be found. It's also rumored that Mount Seven Sages is home to monkey wine, a rare delicacy scarcely found elsewhere. Both brothers begin drooling at the mere thought. Wherein remarks that their love for alcohol is so infamous that people call them the rising drunken ghosts. They enthusiastically confirm the title and fully support his decision. However, Byung interjects, warning that the mountain is perilously close to the demonic sect's territory, which could trigger conflict with the orthodox sect. Wherein asks how anyone would recognize them as members of the Tianzhong clan. If caught, they can simply claim to be from another group. Byung counters, saying such a lie would dishonor their clan's reputation. He questions whether pride is worth risking their lives. In the face of overwhelming evil, he asserts, survival should come before pride even if it means claiming allegiance to a demonic sect. Jungwook, emboldened, agrees with Wherein, questioning why they should fear the demonic sect in the first place. Byung skeptically asks if their stance is genuine or merely driven by greed for the monkey wine. Jungwook, already energized like a mischievous monkey at the thought of the drink, doesn't deny it. Wherein then softens his tone, saying he wants to bring something meaningful back for his parents, as he's been a source of trouble for too long. Byung, convinced by his sincerity, reluctantly agrees. Pleased, Wherein thanks everyone and proposes making proper preparations for the journey. At a nearby inn, Wherein smiles slyly and admits that he fabricated the story about the monkey wine. No such drink exists on Mount Seven Sages. Instead, there's something far more precious, the demonic poison stoneflower. This rare flower grows from a crystal formed by the poisonous remains of insects that gather in a specific tomb to die over centuries. Their pooled toxins harden into a crystal, and when a seed lands upon it, it blooms into a flower filled with potent poison and demonic energy. This is the true prize on Mount Seven Sages. Upon arrival at the inn, Wherein overhears rumors about numerous demonic sects converging on the mountain in search of the flower. He's puzzled by how this secret has become public knowledge. Byung, calmly sipping her tea, remarks that powerful demonic masters have already gathered, making the situation even riskier. Wherein acknowledges the inevitable conflict over the flower but insists he won't involve himself. His true target is Gochiak, the serpent dragon sect heir, who will surely emerge victorious and claim the flower. Gochiak ascended from first rate to the peak level within just half a year, making the flower an ideal component for his martial cultivation. Given the Tianzhong clan's demonic origins, it could also prove invaluable to Wherein. Finishing his drink in a single gulp, Wherein slams the cup on the table and declares that their course remains unchanged. They are still heading to Mount Seven Sages. Byung stands up, incredulous, and asks if he didn't hear the talk about the demonic sect gathering there. He calmly replies that the mountain is a route to the Jaegal clan, who are likely involved in the situation anyway. Meeting them might not be such a bad idea after all. Wherein exhales deeply and leans across the table, informing Byung that while she might be comfortable with the plan, encountering formidable martial artists would leave them no choice but to flee. He then inquires about the two fools. Glancing back, they spot the brothers sprawled on the floor, unconscious from excessive drinking. Wherein shakes his head and shrugs, assuring her he'll avoid areas frequented by dangerous martial artists. Byung appears skeptical but eventually concedes. They relocate to a new spot where they'll remain temporarily. Wherein remarks that the vicinity of Mount Seven Sages resembles a chaotic gallery. Though too feeble to venture there, he believes the ultimate victor is the one who prevails in the end. A flashback reveals Wherein advising the group to inspect inns and taverns operated by the Serpent Dragon sect. They should target establishments with few patrons but numerous horses, as Gochiak, the young sect leader, requires many horses for swift movement. Discovering a stable suggests Gochiak and his men might halt there, even if he's secured the demonic poison stoneflower. The flower won't be transported immediately but stored in a sect-controlled inn before being moved to a secure location. Wherein explains that the only inn meeting these criteria is their current lodging. Staying there ensures Gochiak will eventually arrive with the flower. Later, a large crowd gathers, and Wherein observes from above. He asks what they're watching, and Jungwook replies that the young master of the Serpent Dragon sect is below, none other than Gochiak, the man Wherein has been anticipating. Wherein is puzzled, wondering why Gochiak is here instead of at Mount Seven Sages. He questions whether Gochiak is truly competing for the flower. One of Gochiak's men approaches and whispers to him. Wherein admits he can't discern their conversation from this distance. Gochiak's demeanor shifts upon hearing the news. He appears furious and begins shouting orders to assemble the clan's swordsmen for a pursuit. Jungwook notes that if Gochiak is mobilizing the 8 swords and 8 slashers of the Serpent Dragon sect, it signifies a major event. Warren speculates that if something urgent has occurred, it might present an opportunity to seize the flower, increasing his chances of obtaining it. He instructs Jungwook to prepare to follow the group. Byung protests, questioning why he's chasing a demonic sect and deeming it too perilous. She expresses deep concern, asking why he keeps diving into riskier situations. Warren explains that Jianghu was on the brink of significant upheaval, and to survive the turmoil, they must grow stronger. He asserts that power is merely a tool for their survival. Byung counters that Jianghu is currently peaceful, and they aren't so weak as to need a herb for strength. Warren disagrees, insisting they are indeed weak and cannot easily achieve their goals without such power. He reveals he has a dream and is determined to secure the flower to protect his family from external threats. He declares that if she believes in him as the clan's heir, she must follow his lead. Byung is startled by his sudden assertiveness, wondering if she's underestimated his maturity. Jungwook chuckles, admitting he hadn't realized Warren possessed such boldness. He and his brother pledge their loyalty, vowing to obey his commands. Byung, seeing this, reluctantly agrees to follow but cautions him not to underestimate Jianghu. Warren nods, acknowledging her concern, and reassures her he's well aware of the dangers, having experienced them firsthand. They then prepare to leave town and head to a different area. As they sneakily follow the Serpent Dragon sect members, Warren says he never expected there to be so many of them. The sect members start to form a formation, and Byung tries to tell Warren about it. He stops her, saying that it looks like Gochiak and the others are setting up an inescapable net. Jungwook becomes worried, saying that means they should probably move quickly. Warren reassures him, saying the main group hasn't done anything yet. He's certain they're waiting to take action once they spot anyone suspicious or the person with the miracle medicine. So, they should wait for the right moment. They listen carefully, hearing shouting in the distance about finding the person. This gives them a chance to sneak away a little further. Warren suggests they move towards the river since, now that the person with the medicine has been found, a person on the run would likely choose to go toward the water rather than the woods. Namwook asks why, and Warren explains that a person escaping would prefer water. After a while, all they hear is the eerie silence of the river. They notice it too. Warren tells them to stay as quiet as possible from now on, and Byung audibly gulps in fear. Suddenly, a man walks through the river, screaming for help. He is covered in blood and getting closer to them. Then, a giant purple hand emerges out of nowhere, crushing the man like a bug. This alarms the group, as a powerful purple aura immediately spreads through the area. An old man appears, taking a long breath while holding the flower they've been searching for. Byung wonders if this is the flying demon bloodlion, and Warren asks if she knows who he is, sensing the ominous aura. Jungwook is surprised, saying Warren doesn't know who he is, adding that if you were to pick 100 experts in the demonic martial scene, the bloodlion would definitely be one of them. Warren notes that the man doesn't seem to be in a good mood and spots the flower in his hand. Warren realizes that if the bloodlion has the flower now, it's about time for the Serpent Dragon sect to make their move. They quickly pull back from the bloodlion, thinking they had the upper hand. Gochiak then says that he ran all the way here after killing the most elite members of his sect. He doesn't expect much from the flying demon bloodlion. The bloodlion laughs, saying he didn't expect weaklings to try to corner him. If it weren't for the Tang clan, he would have torn them all apart. Gochiak reaches into his robe and asks the bloodlion if he recognizes this. He pulls out a strange box, and the bloodlion immediately recognizes it as the 1,000-needle dart. He asks how Gochiak has it. Gochiak says he spent a lot of money to get it and reveals that not only does he have one, but everyone in his clan surrounding the bloodlion also has one. They all point them at him. The bloodlion gets angry, asking if they really think such inferior weapons can hurt him. He begins releasing his aura. At the same time, the group fires the darts, sending a volley of needles flying through the air, almost like fireworks. As they fall toward the bloodlion, he brings his hands together, and 2 giant purple hands form above him, clapping together. The shockwave from the clapping knocks many of the needles away. Warren stops and wonders if this is what he thinks it is. The blood lion starts to rise into the air, releasing even more aura than before. Gochiak is stunned and asks how this makes sense. The blood lion starts to laugh as he begins to flee, saying they are no match for him. Gochiak grins, saying he's ready for the challenge. He orders the second squad to shoot, but the needles are already flying toward the blood lion. Gochiak is too late to react, and he gets caught in the explosion, causing him to fall into the water. The group surrounds him, and Gochiak shouts, ordering the 8 swords to surround the blood lion and take the flower immediately. The group charges at the blood lion from above, but he laughs, saying they will never find the medicine and that he'll take them all down to hell with him. A fierce and brutal battle begins, and the blood lion easily takes down many of them, even mocking one fighter who thought he was getting ahead of himself. Byong and the others watch in disgust, with Byong saying she's never seen such a bloodbath before. She asks Warren, who is calm despite the chaos, how he can stay so composed, considering this is likely his first experience in Jianghu. Meanwhile, some of the sect members shout that they've caught the blood lion. He is now riddled with arrows and blades, collapsing into the river and taking his last breath. Gochiak tells his men to search him for the medicine, but when they do, they report that it's not there. Gochiak begins to panic, insisting they need to search again, as they saw the blood lion holding the medicine. There's no way he could have hidden it, and they must find it. Warren tells the group to follow him as they move through the trees. He calmly explains that the miracle medicine isn't actually on the blood lion, but he has a hunch about where it might be. Byang asks if he's sure, since they clearly saw the blood lion holding it. Warren explains that the blood lion probably sent it down the river. He mentions the water barrier the blood lion created earlier was not just for defense, but to block their sight while he secretly pushed the flower into the river using his martial arts. If that's true, the flower would still be there, and they could follow the water to find it. They hear shouting behind them, and Warren tells them to hurry. It won't be long before others figure out where the medicine is too. They spot the purple aura of the flower in the river, and Warren immediately runs over, pulling it out of the water. He asks everyone to wait and takes out a vial, handing the box to Jungwook. He pours something from the vial onto a different flower. Byang asks if they think this is what she believes it is, and Warren confirms that it's poison. She warns him that it's not good for an orthodox martial artist to carry poison, but Warren assures her it's a useful tool. By poisoning the fake flower, they will trick the others into thinking it's the real one. It won't fool them for long, but it will buy them enough time to escape. Jungwook laughs, saying it was easy. While everyone else was fighting for their lives, they managed to get the flower just by sneaking around. Warren shrugs, saying they were just lucky, and it's time to go. But just then, the box is ripped from his hands. A man lands next to him, and the group freezes, not sensing his presence before. Warren turns to look at the man, who grins and says, "It's mine now." At that moment, none of the 4 realized the old man's presence. By the time they noticed him, he was already standing beside Warren. The other 3, alarmed, shouted his name, fear rising within them as they recognized the man before them, the flying demonic blood lion. His presence here was far from ordinary. Before Hen could react, the old man struck him with a powerful punch to the stomach. The blow sent Hen flying backward into the forest, leaving a deep crack in the ground as he landed. The remaining 3 were frozen in fear, silently calling Hen's name, deeply worried for him. The old man's entire body radiated a purple aura. His face twisted with fury as he accused them of being thieves who didn't know their place. He then raised the flower to his mouth and bit into it. His terrifying expression grew darker, and the purple aura around him thickened. He declared that he had planned to take his time absorbing the flower's power, but since they had forced him to act, he would tear apart every human present and replenish his chi with their blood. The storm-like energy surged violently, spreading outward as the aura enveloped him entirely, seemingly absorbing the flower's power. Byong stood frozen, her body stiff, her trembling hand gripping her sword as she faced the old man's overwhelming power. In her mind, she realized this was the first time she was fighting someone so much stronger. Fear filled her eyes as gruesome memories of the old man's past massacres replayed in her mind. Her body felt like it was sinking into darkness, and her instincts screamed that she was truly going to die this time. Fortunately, the voice of the young men beside her pulled her back to reality. One of them remarked that he had never thought before acting, which was how he had earned the title of Ghostblade. The two men stepped forward, trying to shield Byung despite her desperate attempts to stop them. Unable to speak with certainty, they introduced themselves as the two rising Ghostblades, Jungwook and Namwook. Smiling, they declared that as warriors of the Tianzhong clan, they would protect the young leader and defeat the demonic bloodlion. Byung, overwhelmed with worry, urgently warned them that the old man was too powerful and that they would die if they fought him. However, the young man cut her off, saying, "Do what needs to be done, Dragonflower Sword." He then turned with a faint smile, reminding her that the old man had just consumed poison. Byung's eyes widened in surprise as she remembered that the young clan leader had replaced the flower with a poisoned one. Jungwook added that not only was the old man severely wounded, but he had also used his life energy as true ki and poisoned himself. If they could stall him, they might have a chance. Jungwook and Namwook sprang into action, splitting into two directions to attack the old man. They told Byung they would launch the first assault, and in the next instant, both charged at the old man from opposite sides. The old man's eyes turned completely white, and blood vessels bulged across his face as he sneered. "I must applaud you for not running." His aura-covered arm blocked both swords directly, and when they made contact, the swords shattered into pieces. His arm then elongated, aiming to strike both men. Caught off guard, the two could do nothing but brace for the attack. In that critical moment, a golden light erupted like a shield, intercepting the old man's strike. It was Byung, wielding a technique called Soaring Dragon Emperor Sword, followed by Heavenly Lightning Ascension. The lightning surrounded her blade and pierced through the old man's left arm. Despite her attack, fear remained on Byung's face. The old man roared in anger, his attention now entirely focused on her. Just as he prepared to retaliate, he suddenly felt something amiss within his body. Abruptly halting his assault, he retreated. At this point, the two men had managed to create a safe distance, but the old man suddenly coughed up blood, glancing at the crimson smear on his palm. He realized that he had been poisoned internally. He wondered if that old woman from the Tang clan had managed to poison him, but quickly dismissed the thought, reasoning that the Tang clan's poison would have already dissolved his organs. The old man shifted his gaze toward Byung's group and concluded that this poison could only be their doing. Fury surged through him as he clenched his teeth and roared in anger, realizing he had been outsmarted. He declared that he would crush their bones into dust. The old man erupted in a violent coughing fit due to the poison coursing through his veins. Meanwhile, Byung and her two companions remained alert. She recalled Ghostblade's words and thought to herself that the old man was nearing his limit. If they could stall him a little longer, they might actually be able to defeat him. However, the old man's sudden maniacal laughter stunned her. He clutched his face, laughing like a lunatic, only to abruptly stop. His expression twisted with rage as he growled in a chilling tone, questioning if he would really meet his end, not at the hands of the Tang clan's old woman or the weaklings of the Serpent Dragon sect, but by the hands of these nameless nobodies. His eyes burned with hatred as he refused to accept this fate. Then, a terrifying realization hit him. The one he had sent flying earlier must have the demonic poison stoneflower. His aura grew even more threatening as his body radiated uncontrollable fury. He declared that if Hen had it, he would take it, even if Hen had already consumed it. He would tear open Hen's stomach and drink its contents. The old man surged forward with a burst of power. Before Byung's group could react, he appeared in front of them, striking Namwook with such force that he was sent flying. Seeing an opening, Byung launched a counterattack, slashing at the old man. To her shock, his body transformed into a strange, unrecognizable form, making her attack useless. The old man then turned his attention to Jungwook, delivering a crushing blow to his face and sending him sprawling. With only Byung left standing, the old man's eyes burned with demonic intensity as he reached for her face. His speed was so overwhelming that she couldn't dodge. Just as his hand was about to grasp her, a blade of sword energy sliced through the air from the distant forest, severing the old man's arm and saving Byung. It was Warren, arriving at an unimaginable speed. His eyes glowed with instability, his demeanor hinting at a loss of control. Earlier, when Warren had been sent flying into the forest by the old man, he had suffered serious injuries. His body was cracked and bleeding, and he had coughed up blood while lying there. He thought grimly to himself, realizing that the flying demonic blood lion had used his life essence as true key to chase him. Warren knew he had to stand and move, but his body refused to obey. Memories of his promises to his companions flashed in his mind as he stared at the sky. He blamed himself for acting as though he knew everything, only to face such bitter failure. Suddenly, Warren noticed something strange. As he touched the blood on his forehead, he realized that the blood on his body seemed to be alive. A sinister energy emanated from the blood, forming a twisted humanoid shape that seemed to beckon Warren to surrender his body. Gradually, Warren became aware of the mystery inside him. Inside my body is the energy of that old man I saw before he regressed, he realized. He remembered using that power during his fight with Instructor M.O. If he used it again, he could defeat the flying demonic blood lion. The energy continued to tempt him, slowly seeping into his body through his mouth. He could feel it trying to control him. If I close my eyes, this terrifying power will take over, he thought. Warren struggled internally, gritting his teeth to prevent the energy from fully invading him. He opened his eyes wide and questioned whether he truly needed power he couldn't control. Determined, he fought against the invading force. I must hold on. I won't let this evil energy take over my body, he vowed. As the aura continued to push against him, Warren shouted at it to be silent. He gathered all his strength and declared, "This body is mine. I am its master, not you. You're just a ghost from the past." Warren promised to protect those he cared about with his own strength. In that instant, the red energy vanished completely, and he regained full control over his body. Without wasting any more time, he focused on his legs and propelled himself toward the battlefield, where his companions were still struggling against the terrifying old man. Just in time, Warren appeared and used the red energy to sever the old man's arm. The old man's arm was cut off, and blood poured out uncontrollably. His face showed shock, unable to understand what had just happened. He quickly retreated, crying out in pain. The old man glared at Warren with hatred, but a second later, his eyes widened in shock. Surrounding Warren was a terrifying red energy that caught him off guard. He realized that this was the power of a demonic master. Stunned, the old man demanded to know how Warren possessed such energy. At that moment, the poison flared up again, causing the old man to clutch his mouth and cough up blood. Byung also turned to look at Warren, recognizing the energy from her previous fight with him. Meanwhile, Jungwook and Namwook returned, both wounded. Realizing he had arrived at the perfect moment, the four of them stood together, ready to face the old man. Warren encouraged them, saying that the flying demonic bloodlion was poisoned and had used his life essence some time ago. He would soon collapse. With a serious expression, Warren gave his first order as the heir of the clan, commanding them all to survive. The group's eyes burned with determination as they stared down the old man. Weakened by poison and the loss of his arm, the old man admitted, "I have faced many challenges in this land, but this situation is one I can't understand." Resolved to fight to the death, he declared that he would give up his own survival and use the last of his strength. His body began to glow with a purple aura. Despite not fully understanding how he gained such power, he sneered and said, "Struggle as much as you want." Facing this deadly foe, the group heightened their guard, fully prepared for a life-or-death battle. In the next moment, both sides charged at each other with all their strength and resolve. No one knew how long the battle would last or what the outcome would be. Elsewhere, a man angrily shouted at his subordinates for failing to find the old man. He and his group quickly moved through the forest, thinking that the old man would soon use his life essence. They arrived at the river near the forest, and when they emerged, the man was shocked by the sight before him. The clearing showed signs of a fierce battle, and he recognized traces of the blood lion's martial arts. He grew more alarmed. Just then, his subordinates called out, announcing that they had found the old man. The man rushed over and saw the old man's body lying on the ground, covered in fatal wounds, blood pooling around him. They concluded that he was dead. The man, dissatisfied, demanded to know the whereabouts of the flower. His subordinates hesitated, unable to answer, and his fury grew. Realizing they had no information about the flower, he roared, "If you can't find the flower, you will die." one of the subordinates nervously confirmed that the flower wasn't there. Enraged, the man drew his sword, prepared to kill the subordinate. The young man closed his eyes tightly, bracing for death. However, to his relief, the man did not follow through. Furious, the man sheathed his sword and began to contemplate who had killed the old man and taken the flower. Which fool fought the flying demonic blood lion and stole the demonic poison stone flower, he thought, his face flushed with rage. The scene transitions to a dense forest where a group of riders hastily flees on horseback. Jungwook laughs heartily, exclaiming his disbelief at their victory over the flying demonic blood lion. Byung, puzzled, questions what he means. Jungwook explains that if the lion had fallen even moments later, they would all have been killed. Reflecting on the encounter, Jungwook admits he still feels the danger of the situation, noting how those who survive such battles are considered strong. He remarks that the flying demonic blood lion, a powerful martial artist in Jianghu, understood its own mortality and fought with everything it had. As they ride, Warren awakens, coughing blood, prompting Byung to ask if he's alright. Warren assures him he's fine, though weary, and comments that their battle with the lion was anything but easy. Holding a strange flower with an ominous purple aura from his robe, he vows to protect his family and clan no matter the cost. However, he acknowledges the path ahead will be dangerous and warns there may be days like today when their lives are at risk. Turning to Instructor Mo, he urges him and the two rising ghost blades to become stronger. Jungwook responds with a determined voice, though Namwook remains unconscious. Byung then addresses Warren, pressing him to explain something. Warren, confused, listens as she clarifies, asking about the ominous energy earlier. Jungwook interjects, stating that the aura felt unlike the energy of the Tianzhong clan and more akin to the flying demonic blood lion's sinister chi. Byung, now worried, asks if Warren has learned demonic arts. Internally, Warren debates whether to reveal his regression, fearing the consequences it might have on the future, and ultimately denies the accusation. He promises to explain everything later. Byung, still uneasy, argues that since they all risked their lives, Warren shouldn't keep secrets from them now. Riding fast to keep up, Warren aggravates his injuries, coughing blood again. Byung notices and urgently asks if he's okay. He smiles faintly, reassuring her and the group that they will be the first to know everything when the time is right. Though dissatisfied, Byung has no choice but to drop the matter. She signals the group to stop and rest, as Warren's condition worsens. As they dismount, Byung observes Warren's declining state and suggests seeking help from the Jaegal clan. Warren disagrees, reasoning that their pursuers, including Gochak and the Serpent Dragon sect, would only bring trouble to the Jaegal clan. Instead, he proposes heading to Mount Wudong, where he has heard of a skilled physician with the surname Heir. Byung questions the existence of such a physician on Mount Wudong, and Warren confirms the rumor. Meanwhile, on Mount Wudong, a white cat leaps gracefully through the forest, pursued by a young man calling it Bull. He pleads with the cat to stop, warning it of the mountain's dangers, but the cat continues running. It halts suddenly at a bush, intrigued by a strange noise emanating from within. As the young man finally catches up and grabs the cat, the sound draws his attention. Before he can investigate further, Warren's group emerges from the bushes, battered and bloodied from their journey. Warren, pale and with his face smeared in blood, cries out in relief at finding someone in the desolate mountain. The sight of his ghastly appearance terrifies the young man and the cat, leaving them trembling as a piercing scream echoes through the forest. Later, in a small straw house deep in the woods, Warren lies unconscious, receiving treatment. When he awakens suddenly, startled by a nightmare of the flying demonic blood lion, he finds his body intact and realizes he has been treated. Relieved, he concludes that they have indeed found the healer they sought. The boy Warren had encountered earlier in the mountains opened the door, noticing that Warren had regained consciousness. The boy explained that Warren had been seriously injured, so he brought him to their clinic, a small establishment run by his grandfather and himself. As Warren tried to rise from the bed, the boy urged him to remain still and take his medicine first. Curious, Warren asked if the boy's grandfather was named Hei Dukong. The boy confirmed this, surprising Warren, who realized that this boy was Ha Kielryung. In turn, Kielryung was startled that Warren knew his name. Warren thought to himself that he had finally found the reason for his journey to Mount Wudong, even using the Jaegal clan as an excuse. This child was the key to completing the Tianzhong clan's unstable martial arts. More importantly, he was destined to become the future strongest man under the heavens, the one supreme Kyoryung. Warren recalled how, before his regression, a battle of unprecedented scale had erupted over a martial arts tome. The conflict involved not only the unorthodox and demon clans but also the 5 great clans. The tome introduced a revolutionary concept, the coexistence of good and evil within a human. When balanced, this duality could produce power far beyond ordinary limits. This philosophy, left behind by Zhang Sanfeng, the progenitor of the Wudong sect, was detailed in the Yin-Yang Depth Heaven tome. In his past life, Kyoryung's family had stumbled upon this tome by chance while foraging for medicinal herbs, which allowed Kyoryung to ascend as the strongest man under the heavens. Warren knew that obtaining this tome could help fulfill his family's dreams. As Warren pondered, he watched Kyoryung diligently prepare medicine. A fly landed on the boy's cheek, and with lightning-fast reflexes, he caught it in his hand. This casual display of speed surprised Warren, revealing that Kyoryung had also been trained in martial arts. However, the boy merely smiled modestly, mentioning that his grandfather had taught him. Despite Kyoryung's young age, his skill left Warren astonished. At that moment, an elderly man with white hair and a kind smile entered the room, recognizing that Warren had awoken. This was Hei Dukgong, Kyoryung's grandfather. After some time, Warren, nearly fully recovered, stepped into the yard, where his companions had also recuperated. Together, Warren and his 3 subordinates bowed deeply to Dukgong in gratitude. Introducing himself as Warren of the Hanan Tianzhong clan, he sincerely thanked the healer for his aid. Dukgong waved off the thanks, insisting it was his duty. However, he then asked why someone from the Hanan Tianzhong clan was in this region. This question momentarily froze the group. Thinking quickly, Warren replied with a smile that he had come to gather ginseng. Dukgong raised an eyebrow, commenting that while they had some medicinal herbs, ginseng was rare and difficult to find. He inquired further, asking why they needed ginseng. Facing Dukgong's probing gaze, Warren appeared briefly flustered but quickly adopted a sorrowful expression. Tears welling in his eyes, he fabricated a dramatic story. He explained that his mother had fallen gravely ill and that his parents, who had cared for him despite his frail health as a child, were the reason he could leave the clan and explore the world. His voice grew more emotional as he claimed he had received a message about his mother's condition and learned that ginseng could save her. As he spoke, he began crying louder, wiping away tears of supposed filial affection. Byung, standing behind him, marveled at his acting, though she couldn't help but recall how healthy Warren's mother had been when they left. She silently wondered why their young clan leader would resort to such an elaborate lie. To their astonishment, Dukgong was deeply moved by Warren's performance. Overcome with emotion, he praised Warren as a model of filial piety and declared that he was touched by the young man's devotion to his parents. With tears streaming down his own face, Dukgong rushed off, announcing that they must find wild ginseng immediately. Warren, satisfied with his success, smiled as his 3 companions stood frozen in disbelief at the scene they had just witnessed. The scene shifted to the mountains, where Byung, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, was astonished to realize that Warren's search for ginseng was serious. She turned to look at him and saw him desperately scouring the area. Noticing Byung slowing down, Warren reminded her firmly to keep searching and not just stand idly. His gaze was resolute as he mentioned needing to find the yin-yang depth but quickly corrected himself, substituting it with ginseng for his mother. Seeing the determination on his face, the 3 subordinates resumed their search with equal diligence. By the time the sun began to set behind the mountains, Dukgong, exhausted from a full day of searching, announced they would have to stop for the day. The group, weary and covered in dirt and plants, returned to Dukgong's house. Wiping his sweat, Warren thought to himself that knowing the future didn't guarantee achieving everything easily. Feeling the weight of his task, he lamented how difficult it was proving to be. Dukgong turned to Warren, assuring him that he would send the ginseng to his location once he found some, asking where Warren was staying. Remembering that Warren mentioned being from the Tianzhong clan of Hanan, Dukgong inquired if he should send it there. Warren clasped his hands, thanked Dukgong, and agreed, then gazed toward the setting sun. Suddenly, he apologized, expressing his desire to stay a few more days to continue searching for ginseng and asking if he could remain at the house. Later, inside the straw house, Warren meditated, his body surrounded by a menacing red and black aura. He thought about searching the places Duckgong frequented, confident he would find clues related to the tome there. What a relief it was, he mused, knowing the right leads. Without them, he wasn't sure how long it would take. He paused his practice and stepped outside, coincidentally meeting Duckgong. Bowing in greeting, the two sat together in front of the house. Duckgong asked if Warren wanted to hike with him, but Warren politely declined, stating he would continue searching on his own. Duckgong smiled lightly, saying he could do as he wished, and the atmosphere turned quiet. Breaking the silence, Warren asked about Keelryung's whereabouts. At that moment, Keelryung appeared holding a white cat, but his expression was filled with fear. Alarmed, Duckgong asked if something had happened, wondering if he had encountered a tiger. Keelryung explained that he had been out hunting with Bakeseal when some people tried to capture the cat, forcing him to flee. Duckgong, visibly worried, remarked that if martial artists climbing Mount Wudong had targeted Bakeseal, it must mean they had realized the cat was a mystic animal. Suddenly, a group of people appeared, shouting that they had found their target. A girl in the group, around Keelryung's age, commented on how fast he had run. Addressing Keelryung, she asked if he owned the cat and suggested he sell it to her. Keelryung firmly refused, declaring that Bakeseal was not for sale. Annoyed, the girl demanded an explanation and offered a handsome sum in exchange. Despite her insistence, Keelryung resolutely rejected the offer, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of Warren's subordinates, who watched the scene curiously. The two groups faced off as Keelryung shielded Bakeseal behind him. Duckgong stepped forward, apologizing and explaining that Bakeseal was like family and not something they could sell. The girl, speaking loftily, warned Duckgong that others would have taken the cat by force and told him to count himself lucky it was her making the offer. She urged him to hand over the cat. Watching her haughty behavior, Warren thought she was arrogant but also reminiscent of his former self. Stepping forward in front of Duckgong, he politely spoke, stating that it was wrong to demand something after it had been clearly refused. However, one of the girl's subordinates, wielding a sword, blocked Warren's path and arrogantly ordered him to step back, asking if he even knew who they were. Maintaining a calm expression, Warren inquired about their identity. The large man introduced himself as a member of the Jaegal clan, revealing that the girl was the youngest daughter of the clan head. Realizing this, Warren was surprised to deduce that she must be Jaegal Yohi, the younger sister of his fiancée, Jaegal Changyang. This concludes the video. Make sure to like and subscribe for another part.